Once upon a time, in a quiet village in the heart of Nigeria, there lived a man named Obinna. Obinna had passed away many years ago. His death was sudden, and the village mourned his loss, for he was a kind and hardworking man. His grave was in the village burial ground, and his family had long accepted his departure. But one dark night, something strange happened. Obinna rose from his grave. No one saw how or why, but when dawn broke, people in the village began to whisper about a man who looked just like Obinna walking around. At first, they were confused because they all knew he had died many years ago. Some thought they were seeing things, but soon enough, the man appeared at the market, the same Obinna they had buried years before. News of Obinna's return spread quickly. People were scared, and many avoided him, but Obinna acted as though nothing had changed. He claimed he had gone on a long journey and had come back home. Some believed his strange story, while others kept their distance, sensing something was very wrong. One day, Obinna announced that he was getting married. His bride-to-be was a young woman named Amaka, who lived abroad and could not be present for their traditional marriage. So, Amaka's sister, Elle, who lived in the village, was chosen to represent her at the marriage ceremony. On the day of the wedding, Elle stood in place of her sister, as is tradition when the bride cannot be present. The celebration was grand, with drummers, singers, and dancers performing in the village square. Everyone was amazed at how quickly Obinna had returned and gotten married. Despite the joy in the air, Elle felt uneasy throughout the ceremony. She had heard the whispers about Obinna's strange return but chose to remain silent. After the marriage, Obinna invited Elle into his house and told her they should celebrate like a true husband and wife. Elle was shocked. She stared at him in disbelief. "Obinna, you are my sister's husband, not mine. I only stood in for her during the wedding. I cannot sleep with you." "It is wrong," Elle said firmly. Obinna's eyes darkened, and his face twisted in anger. "Your sister is not here. You are now my wife in every way that matters. You will do as I say." Elle refused again, and Obinna's anger grew. He began making life difficult for both Elle and her sister, Amaka, who was still abroad. He refused to let Elle live in peace, constantly tormenting her. He would appear at her house in the middle of the night, standing silently at her door or whispering her name from the shadows. No matter where she went, she felt his presence, cold and haunting. Even Amaka, miles away, began to feel strange things happening around her. She often dreamed of Obinna and would wake up in fear, not understanding why she felt like she was being watched. The village grew even more unsettled. People who had once been Obinna's friends now avoided him, whispering among themselves that the man who returned was not really Obinna. They said he was a spirit, a demon who had taken on Obinna's form to trick the living. One day, while Elle was at the market, an old woman stopped her. The woman had a wrinkled face and eyes that seemed to see beyond the physical world. She looked at Elle and said, "Child, you are in danger. The man you call Obinna is not of this world. He is a restless spirit, and he will not stop until he has claimed you." Terrified, Elle rushed home to tell her family. They all gathered to discuss what to do. Just then, a man from a neighboring village arrived. His name was Namdi, and he claimed to have known Obinna before his death. When he saw Obinna, he recognized something odd about him. "This is not the Obinna I knew," Namdi said, his voice trembling. "The man I knew had a scar on his left arm from a hunting accident. This man has no scar." The villagers were shocked. Could it be that the man they had welcomed back was truly a spirit? They had suspected, but now they had proof. When word reached Obinna, he became furious. That night, he appeared at Eda's door once again, but this time his appearance had changed. His once human face now had the hollow eyes of the dead, his skin pale and cold. He banged on her door, demanding to be let in, but Eda refused, screaming for help. Suddenly, Namdi appeared with a group of villagers. They carried torches and chanted ancient incantations meant to banish evil spirits. When they approached Obinna, he let out a terrible shriek, and his body began to wither and fade. The villagers watched in horror as he dissolved into thin air, leaving behind nothing but the faint scent of decay. The village was silent after that, the air heavy with unease. Though Obinna was gone, the villagers feared he might return again someday. Elle and her family moved away from the village, but the memory of Obinna's strange return lingered in the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. Some say that on quiet nights, if you listen closely, you can still hear Obinna's voice calling out from the darkness, searching for the wife who never was. And so, the story of Obinna did not end. It became a warning to all: the dead must remain with the dead, for when they return, they bring nothing but fear and misery. After Obinna disappeared, Elle and her family believed the nightmare was finally over. But the weight of what had happened still haunted them. Though they moved far from the village, settling in a bustling town miles away, the memory of Obinna's return stayed with them like a shadow. Elle couldn't shake the feeling that something still wasn't right. Her dreams became more frequent and disturbing. She would wake up in the dead of night, covered in sweat, hearing whispers that echoed Obinna's voice, calling her name. It was as if, even in his absence, he still lingered, reaching out from beyond. Amora, still abroad, began to experience strange occurrences too. Objects in her house would move on their own, doors would creak open, and at times, she felt a cold breeze rush past her, even though all the windows were shut. She dismissed it as stress from being away from home, but deep down, she couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling that something was watching her. One evening, a message came from their old village. An elder had fallen ill, and on his sickbed, he kept muttering Eda's name, insisting she return to the village immediately. At first, Eda was hesitant; she had no intention of going back to that cursed place. But her mother insisted that it was a sign, a warning from the ancestors. Eda finally agreed to return, but this time, she was determined to find out the truth about Obinna and whatever dark force had come with him. When she arrived in the village, the atmosphere felt different, heavy with something unspoken. The villagers stared at her with wide eyes, murmuring among themselves. Some whispered that it had been her presence at the wedding that had drawn the spirit back. Others believed the bond between her and Amora was cursed. No one dared to speak openly, but their gazes followed Eda everywhere she went. The elder, who had called for Eda, was barely conscious. His breathing was shallow, his skin pale and fragile like parchment. As Eda approached his bedside, he grabbed her hand with surprising strength. His eyes opened wide, filled with fear. "Child," he whispered, his voice raspy, "Obinna, he was never meant to return. He is trapped between the world of the living and the dead. His spirit was restless. The ritual to lay him to rest was never completed. Someone disturbed his grave." Eda felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Who disturbed his grave? Why did he come back? The elder coughed weakly. It was not just him. He is not alone. There is something older, darker, that walks with him. It fed on his anger, his longing. It wanted to use him to break into our world. His hand trembled as he tried to sit up. "You must go to the forest. Find the priestess, only she can help. Before it's too late." Before Eda could ask more, the elder's eyes glazed over, and his grip loosened. He was gone. The villagers, sensing the elder's death, gathered outside the hut, mourning quietly. But Eda had no time for grief. She knew that if Obinna had truly been disturbed by something darker, it would not stop until it claimed her or Amora. And now, with the elder's last words echoing in her mind, Eda realized that this was not just about a restless spirit, it was about something much more dangerous. That night, Ada set off into the forest, guided only by the faint directions given to her by the elder before he passed. The air in the forest was thick and oppressive, each tree seeming to bend and twist in unnatural ways. Strange sounds echoed through the woods, like whispers in a language she couldn't understand. After what felt like hours of wandering, Ada finally found a small clearing. In the middle of it stood an old woman dressed in a dark robe, her face hidden beneath a hood. This was the priestess the elder had spoken of. The priestess seemed to be expecting her. Without turning around, she said in a low, gravelly voice, "I have been waiting for you, child. The dead do not rest easily in these lands, not when disturbed by those who seek power." Ada knelt before her. "Please, I need your help." "Obina," he came back, and something followed him. "The elder said you could help me." The priestess nodded slowly, then motioned for Ada to sit. She began to chant softly, her voice carrying through the trees like the wind. As the chant grew louder, the air around them grew colder, and shadows seemed to gather at the edges of the clearing. "You must know the truth," the priestess said. Obina's grave was disturbed by a coven of dark spirits, ones that have been waiting for a vessel to cross over into the world of the living. They used his body, his unresolved anger, to tie themselves to this world. He was not fully aware of it, but every act of torment he inflicted on you and your sister strengthened their hold. Ada's heart raced. "How do I stop them?" The priestess's eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. "To free him, you must return to the place where he was buried. There, we will perform the final rite, but you must understand, this will be dangerous. If the spirits sense that you are trying to banish them, they will not let you go easily." Ada nodded, fear and determination swirling inside her. "I'll do it. I just want this to end." The next day, Ada and the priestess returned to the village and gathered the necessary items for the ritual. As night fell, they made their way to Obina's grave, the air thick with anticipation. The village had grown eerily quiet, and even the animals seemed to avoid the burial ground. When they arrived, the priestess began to chant, her voice rising into the night sky. As she did, the ground around Obina's grave began to tremble, and a dark mist seeped out from the earth. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the clearing, and Ada felt a presence behind her. Obina's form appeared, but this time, it was not the man she once knew. His face was twisted with rage, his eyes hollow and glowing with a faint red light. "You should not have come," Obina's voice echoed, but it was mixed with something else, something ancient and malicious. The priestess continued her chant, her voice unwavering. "This is not your place, spirit. Go back to where you belong." But the spirits were strong, and they fought back, swirling around Obina's form like a storm. As the battle between the priestess and the spirits raged on, Ada stood frozen in fear, unsure if they would survive this night. And just as the mist began to close in on her, the ground beneath Obina's feet cracked open, revealing a dark, bottomless pit.